Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan D'Angelo. I'm a certified executive chef with the American Culinary Federation. I'm a member of the American Academy of Chefs. I could honestly say I've been in the business since I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. My parents had first started out with a steak and hoagie shop in the 60s, and then we went into the restaurant. I was born and raised in the Roxborough area of Philadelphia. Graduate of Roman Catholic High School right around the corner here, Broad and Vine Street. And like I said, we grew up in the business, so as years progressed, I realized that running a family business, and we also had a separate building of a catering business as we progressed over the years. And I, looking at everything, realized, we never really did a P&L, until it was time to see the accountant. We've never really did a food cost of a lot of things. We wanted to stay within reasonable prices for the local community, and we just put a number on everything. Not realizing, we were still making a profit. I know our catering business, and we started to do a Sunday brunch in order to market the catering business, but in a good month, we would do almost $800 to $1 million. And that was during the busy season, when you're doing 2-3 weddings a weekend, and then you're doing small parties in between. Our biggest cost at that factor was the rental. We had to rent the building we were in. Although the restaurant was our own, it was still a major cost, And then when business started to decline during the bad economy, I feel we used to always do a New Year's Eve party. When you're doing New Year's Eve all-inclusive, and you're getting $60 a person, and you're doing 250 people, it's not a bad piece of change for the day. You're talking about $20,000. When the year 2000 attacked us and came, and everybody started talking about the lights are going out, and it was going to be the centennial and this and that. To me, that was the decline of New Year's Eve parties and what New Year's Eve was, because everybody wanted to hose everybody. And the way I used that expression, meaning that they attacked them with cost. New Year's Eve for the year 2000 could have went up to $500 a person for the same thing that they got for $120 a person. And I feel that after that, and sometimes when you outcost yourself or outprice yourself, you don't ever want to outprice yourself in the market. I'm also the local president I'm the president to the local chefs chapter with the American Culinary Federation. And people always ask, why you're a member of the chapter. And to me, the whole idea was marketing. You also want to market yourself. Any chance that you get to go out to see people, bring some product with you if you're selling a jar. I like to go around the room to see what everybody's, interests are in. You might be a freestanding restaurant, you might be a food truck, which are very popular today. Being a chef and being involved, not only, the microphone. That you have to be able to sell yourself and also sell the product. And some of you might have your own sauce or product that you're trying to market. And you got to remember the personality has to also go into the product, not just in yourself. And your personality will be in that product. If you have deep, bold flavors, then that's what you are. You're that type of person. I'm outgoing. I've done a lot of venues for a lot of different people. I've been on the 10 show with when they were here on Sea Island Avenue in the old studio when Steve Levy was there. I've done QVC spots to try to help sell products, so I got an idea of what they look for, what they're doing. So marketing to me is very fun. I'm involved with the marketing program with St. Joe's now. Some of you were here when George was teaching the marketing program. He's also been my instructor over the last year or so. And to me, marketing is probably one of the most fun parts of the food industry. A lot of times you're in it, you don't realize how much work you put in. You say, oh, I only have to go to the store to pick up a few things. And as Delilah said, you got to remember that every time you do something, that costs somebody something. Today we're going to look at the fundamentals of food costing, of menu costing. I'm going to go through the handouts today. I get the PowerPoint. Instead of giving you a PowerPoint, I've been teaching for a good 20 plus years, and I always have to remember a few fundamentals. Capture the audience and understand at what level we are. You can stare at the PowerPoint all you want, but if you have something to take with you and you can look it over, I think you retain it a little more, and you can jot down some notes that you can understand what it is. You know, because a lot of times after 45 minutes of lecture, you're like, okay, now what's this guy got to say? So I want to try to make it as fun as possible. I have we're going to do a couple breakout sessions where you can get where your tables, the 2 or the 3 or 4, whoever, to try to help cost out a couple simple products. I have the cost of the product there, just to get an idea of what you're looking into. Always remember also that you're not going to have to do this by hand. There are a lot of programs out there. There's a specific program I know there in a lot of the culinary magazines called Chef Tech. That could cost anywhere from $600 up to $1,500 or $2,000, depending on what format you want. You've used it before, Carl? And all you have to do is input numbers. It's almost like Excel. You push a button, and it'll cost out that menu for you. When you see what we're going to talk about, you're going to say, shoot, I can't do this by hand anymore. Back in the 80s, we would have. You know, we would have had a calculator, we've been sitting there. And part of being an executive chef or being a chef owner is doing just that. You know, it's not about the cooking. It's not about going out and trying to sell the products. It's about how much is this going to cost me and how much am I going to make on it. You know, when we do products or we do menus, there's certain items on the menu that are called loss leaders. Same thing with a supermarket. For instance, when you go to, you can relate to going to the supermarket to shop, all of a sudden you see lobster tails for $4.99. What does that do? That draws you in. Are they making any money on it? Probably not. Are they getting their cost back? Absolutely. But once they draw you in, now me on the other hand, see, being a chef and a buyer, I'll just go in and buy the lobsters and leave. But for the most part, they're drawing you in. Another perfect example, Thanksgiving. It's coming soon, right? What's the first thing that the supermarkets did? Yep, free turkey. And you're over there trying to buy $500 worth of food to buy a $20 turkey. But the perception is, and I know George brought this up, perception is reality, that, you know what, if I would have just bought the turkey that way, I would have never had to worry about spending all this money. But once they get you in to go get your turkey, what do you need to buy? Everything that goes with it. So if they increase that by a penny, and they sell 10 to 20,000 cans of cranberry for an extra penny, now they're making more money on you. So you see, it's about perception. You want it to perceive to be more than what it really is, because that's what food is. Food's perceived. A good example. We go to a white tablecloth restaurant in Center City, and we get a nice fancy meatloaf. So what does the chef do? I put the mashed potatoes in a piping bag, okay? I'm going to pipe it in the center of the plate. I'm going to take the green beans and tuck them in the corner, maybe put some fried onions, put the meatloaf, and then drizzle a little sauce. I'm getting $18 for it. Wow. Am I selling it? Absolutely. Why? Looks good. Pretty. Now I go to the diner. I get the exact same thing that's a scoop of mashed potatoes, green beans, and meatloaf for $7.95. Is it the same product? Absolutely. Although the white tablecloth restaurant has higher costs. You know, somebody got to pay for tablecloths. Somebody has to pay for all the cooks back there. That's why sometimes when I have my students do a project, the first things I look for, not only at the bottom line food cost, right away I'll say, how can this cost you $100 each? I said, you'll be out of business before you start. Because they use some of the programs that don't look further down to see what the extension is. And I gave you do have a handout, and we'll go through them, like I said, of the different, let's see, where is it? Maybe I gave them more. Oh, this one. These are some of the food costing you can Google online to look at some formats that might be good for you. And this one here particularly I recognize because I know a lot of the students will look for it and use it. Because you can download some free items off the internet that'll help you calculate the cost. And you can see at the bottom there where it says total cost, estimated sale price. That means our old theory used to be if you get 3 times your cost, you covered your costs. Yes, ma'am. I think they made, I only have this one that I have, but she should have more copies. If not, we can make you one of these. Food cost margin is the margin of the price of the product. And then they talk about the generated profit. How much are you going to make? You know, there's some items that you're going to make more than other items. Like chicken's always cheap, so we can make a lot of money on chicken. Fish, on the other hand, believe it or not, is so expensive for what ungodly reason I don't know. But I know back in the 80s when I was really cooking heavy, salmon used to be expensive and flounder was cheap. And you would think it would stay the same, but within about 10 years, everything changed over. Now salmon's cheap because they farm raise it. I remember there was an article in the New York Times that said, you know, what kind of salmon you want, and it looked like you were buying paint because they would open up all the different colors of the salmon, light pink, heavy pink, dark pink. So it's really relative to your type of operation and what you need to spend. I have a handout that we'll give later. It's called the butcher's test. Majority of you probably won't use that. And why I say that is because that's for big operations that if you were going to use whole chickens. Now at home, I do this all the time. I buy a whole chicken, it costs me $2. I can break it down and get 8 different dinners out of that chicken. So the extension of it's a lot cheaper, but in my place of work, if I don't need all those cuts, what am I going to do with it? You know, in the culinary field, it's charcuterie, which means cured meats. So what did the butchers do and what did the chefs do many years ago is they took all that trim, they made sausages, they made pâtés, then they resold them. So if you could take a profit, you could take trims that you already paid for and sell it, then we're making a profit. For instance, prime rib. You know, we have a special tonight's prime rib. You got to roast a whole one, right? Everybody understands that? So if I only sell half, what do? It's really hard to reheat prime rib. So you do one or two things. You leave it whole, you slice it thin, you sell it as a sexy French dip, which is a hot roast beef sandwich. But a French dip, see, I always tell the students, you got to make the food look good and you got to make it sound sexy. You know, hot roast beef or a French dip. I put French dip on the menu, I might sell more. And I was just talking to one of my buddies who just opened up Kermit's down on Washington Avenue, the bakery down there. And he made this croissant filled with scrambled egg, and he came this fancy name, and he didn't sell any. He changed it to a croissant-filled scrambled egg and cheese with bacon, and he sold out every day. Because you also got to remember, you got to be able to talk to the customer. Not personally, but talk to them through that menu. You know, I run the restaurant at the Art Institute that's open 2 days a week. And when I write the menu, I tell the students that just those little increments that you write have to be able to explain to the customer what I'm trying to sell. For instance, clam chowder. What's underneath? Fried potatoes, diced a fried clam, a drizzle of this. And you say, wow, I want to buy it. So we're going to try to go through some, the PowerPoints. I'll talk about why we do food costs, what we do food costs. And we'll talk about individuals. Just raise your hand anytime for your type of operation and what direction you want to go in. You know, we got to talk about ounces and pounds. I have a conversion handout that we'll give later on that has all different formats of conversions of how much is a cup. You know, the old saying, a pint's a pound the world around, doesn't necessarily hold true sometimes because flour weighs different in weight in a cup than liquid does. So we got to remember that dry measurements and wet measurements are different. How much is that going to cost us? You know, is it, I did a little spot for Channel 48 that used to be around years ago. It wasn't the old 48, it was another, it was in Manayunk. And we did some items that tried to make sense. You know, food items, recipe items, you want to make sure that what's it going to cost me? How much am I going to make on it? You got to remember, we're all in business for what? Make money. There's no ungodly reason. I used to tell my mom, we're not here to, you know, to be the glorified owners because it doesn't pay the bills. You know, when I was a kid, because we owned a restaurant and all, everybody thought we had money. We didn't have money, we just ate. Proofs in the pudding. But it wasn't like we were rich off of it. Some people that do get rich, I was just watching the Steve Harvey show last week on the individual, the person that's one of the partners in Outback. And this really was amazing because he was talking about how he got started in the business, and he talked about the bloomin' onion. They sold 17 million bloomin' onions last year and made a profit of $1.2 billion. Just on an appetizer, that's probably one of the worst appetizers you could possibly eat. A bloomin' onion is equal to 2,500 calories. And that's another thing that I tell the students that we have to keep in mind. We have the consumer's health in our hands. Just because we're going to dip something in the batter and deep fry, don't mean it's any good. Now it's going to sell, don't get you wrong. Because I've tried it all. In fact, I even tried the cronuts at school last week just to see what all this talk was about. And it turned out unbelievable. But come on, we're frying something that's full of fat. A croissant, though, that we're deep frying that you can't beat. But again, we have to remember we still have the consumer's health in our hands, so we got to keep that in mind. And it's the same thing with your cost value. You know, just because you want to sell something doesn't mean it's going to make you profit. Is it better for me? As I was saying, we were doing Channel 48. I did a segment called Speed Scratch Cooking. Anybody know what that could possibly mean? If you're going to speed scratch something, what do you think we do with it? You make it look like you're doing it from scratch. For instance, I take a yellow cake box. That's my speed. I make scratch. I'm going to add little miniature chocolate chips to it to make a chocolate chip cake. That's my own little fold-in. That's speed scratch. I sped it up by using the foundation of the cake, but you can add orange juice and orange segments to make an orange cake. You can make a cranberry cake. But the foundation was the yellow cake mix. You know why? Because I didn't have it at my catering business. I didn't have a bake shop. You know, we did the wedding cake. I ordered it out. It was cheaper. There was no way in the world, especially with a wedding, that I want to try to make the cake myself and then have it look lousy or have it, taste lousy. All the other cakes, for the sweet table, I'd have to buy some of them. Then I would decorate them, and they look good. But these are some of the things you guys have to think about on, is it worth for me to do it from scratch? Excuse me, a lot of times I say no. If you're selling a chicken sandwich, do I want to fabricate the chickens? At home it's one thing, because you can buy 5 whole chickens, you break them down, now you got meals for a couple weeks. If in fact you are selling a lot of chicken legs, chicken thighs, and you can utilize them, and you're doing cases at a time, just remember this, labor cost. Who's cutting them, breaking them all down? And then what am I going to do with the bones after I break them down? You don't have space to make stock. So you got to figure, is it worth my time to do everything from the scratch part of it? And a lot of times it's not. I can bring you to a lot of restaurants you think are phenomenal that probably don't make a lot of their stuff from scratch. And especially the I shouldn't say QSRs, which is quick service restaurant, but some of the ones like Fridays and Applebee's where they don't have a chef per se, they have a kitchen manager. They take everything that's usually packaged. And a lot of that too is for safety, because they don't have the right amount of people. But at the same token, do I have to pay somebody $10 an hour to break all those chicken down? You have to incorporate that in your cost of the product. So what I'm saying is, if you have a chicken breast sandwich, buy the chickens already done, ready to go. Because we know that there's 16 ounces a pound. There's no cooking loss at that point because we're buying the chickens already prefabbed, ready to go. Or what we call is IQF. IQF means individual quick frozen. They're already weighed out, 4-ounce chicken breast. Now I know I get 4 orders of chicken breast out of 1 pound. And again, I want to go over this, and I'll write it all down, but I'm just giving you a brief summary of what we're trying to accomplish because I don't want to get too deep because you'll be confused. We're only here for a couple hours. Can you imagine doing this for 11 weeks? The students have to take a culinary math class, and it's 4 hours a day, once a week, for 11 weeks. And then even still then, you still got to tweak a few things. But you buy a program because you're in the business. It's a write-off, and it's part of business operations. Part of your startup is you also have to remember about the business end of it. Again, being an executive chef, after a while, you don't cook. Most executive chefs at hotels are in the office trying to figure out, well, if I bring an extra person in, it's going to cost me this. Well, their bonus relies on that a lot of times. Or is it going to cost me this amount of money, or could I just buy them? And then they search for products that are pre-made, and there's a lot of new products out there today that are, incredible, opposed to what it was 10 years ago. So, anybody have any questions at all while we're... Because I could talk forever, so I don't want to keep going on and on. Yes, ma'am.
Could you suggest a program?
Well, I know Chef Tech is one. I don't really know too many other ones because I really haven't had to get into it. I know Chef Tech has been involved with the ACF. I see their ad at the end of we had one at school. I think the minimum starts at $600 or $800, but it's programmed all out just like this front cover of this one. So all you need to do is write your recipe out. And again, once you take that time to do it, it's done. Even if you want to, then you can push a button, it'll increase the amount you need. So if you start off with making 10, 10, 10, you say, I got to make 100 of these. Well, do I times it by 10 or do I plug in, I need 100 portions and push a button, it'll tell you exactly what you need. Excuse me. Some of them even give you a shopping list. Yes?
Not to take away from what you're saying, but just to enhance Chef Tech, the capability of Chef Tech not only does it do your recipe and on scale,
And pictures are good because you want to create a program, you want to create a packet that you can give to your cook and say, here's what I want it to look like, here's the ingredients. So and manufacturers go through all this. Manufacturers know, if you notice, they really, perception again, what happened when the economy started to tank? What did the manufacturers start doing? Anybody go shopping and realize what happened? They took an ounce or two out of the product. Peanut butter went from a 1 pound jar to a 14-ounce jar. Jar looks the same. Except if you don't, see, I'm bad because being a chef and knowing, I go walk the supermarket because I do the shopping. I don't want anybody else doing it because I'm a buyer. There's a difference between a buyer and a shopper. A buyer my wife will just pick things off. She'll go to the most expensive place and, oh, that looks good. Me, I can't pay that kind of money for that. And sometimes, like, there's a home pierogi place on Roxborough Avenue in Roxborough. My cousin went there the other day and bought a dozen of pierogies. Jalapeno stuffed. Hallelujah. $9.75 a dozen for dumplings. Wow. Me being a chef, I have a little hard time with that. I think that's a lot of money. And the pierogi place does good, but they're also starting to do too much of everything. And we're going to talk about your menu selections. You don't want to be all things, all people. You want to concentrate on what you're doing and sell the best you can of what you're selling. Because now they're selling sandwiches. They're starting to get into, we talk about cost. This exhaust system, it costs $1,000 a foot for installation. The average 14 feet to 20 foot, depending on how long your line is. That's 20 grand before we even start to open the doors or buy any other equipment. So these are some of the things we need to look at when we look at menu costing or food cost in general. Then we got labor cost. Food cost, you want to keep between 28 and 32%. 32 is high, but it's depending on your type of operation. The lower the food cost, the more profit you're going to make. And that's why I say when it comes down to buying products, like if you're going to buy sausage, do a sausage sandwich or sausage scallopini, you got to think that certain proteins have certain cooking losses. For instance, roast beef, you're going to do a roast beef party. Well, I had a woman call me yesterday and said, listen, I'm having a party. Maybe you can help me out. I got roast beef. I have one top round that weighs 19 pounds. Great. Now we got to cook it. With meats, you usually have a 33% cooking loss. So now I'm going to lose about 4 pounds to the fat and the water after I roast it. You got to create that in your cost. So if I paid $2 a pound, it was 19 pounds, it's $38. Figuring the cooking loss, now I paid more money for it, but you don't think about these kind of things. Excuse me, what happens if you trim the fat off it? And then went to cook it. Now that fat, we were always taught when we talk about this butcher test that you get a whole filet. Trim the fat, weigh it. The trimmings, weigh that also. Now let's see what really we have to use. By it's said and done, the filet mignon probably cost you $12 a pound. When you said, wow, I paid $9.99 a pound. That was great, wasn't it? Yeah, it's all good. You just threw the whole thing in the oven. You didn't throw nothing out. So we got to think about that and waste. I used to tell some of the guys who used to work for me, I would look to waste some of the stuff. And I would say, listen, when you're looking for a raise, I want you to dig it out of the trash because that's where it is. You know why? Because then we cut the celery and cut this much off the end. Well, we paid for that. I can't stand it when at school when they do a pepper and I know we want nice cuts, but we cut the top and the bottom off. I said, where's that going? Because I don't like to waste anything. I'll trim it. I'll use that for a salad. Yes.
I have a question. When you were talking about the waste, I remember going to a restaurant and they sold bone marrow. Is that something that they had as waste because they split it and it was just all?
They probably just bought the bones. You can just buy bones.
Oh, okay.
And if they had the bandsaw on site, they can split them, but they'll ask their butcher, whoever would split them for me because I'm going to roast it off for bone marrow. Now, I know years ago, bones were free.
Yeah.
Where they used to be $0.25 a pound. Now they're almost $1. I said $1 something a pound for chicken bones. So here's the next question. Do I buy chicken bones to make my own stock? Or do I buy chicken base and use that? At my catering place, I use base. Back in the day, base was bad because it was salty. But they make so many of them today, salt-free. They make a mirepoix. They make a roasted pepper. They make a shrimp base, a clam base, a crab base, a seafood base, and a fish base. All to accomplish what? Flavor. Right. So do you have time at your place of business to take those bones and put them on the stove and get celery, carrots. See, that all was created many, many years ago from waste. You know, the butcher was over here in the hotel, and all he did all day, excuse me, was butcher chickens. Okay, today we do chickens, tomorrow we do. I remember working at the Adams Mark Hotel, my internship, in 1985. I got thrown to the butcher's, and he said, I need 1,500 strip steaks. Okay, so when we got towards the end, and a strip steak is the New York strip, has an eye towards the end, we would take that end, and we'd put a little X in it, we'd freeze it whole, and then it would slice it to make cheesesteaks out of it. That's utilization of the product. We need to understand that because that's everything you buy, everything you do costs something. You know, you get in your car, go to the store. I worked for a friend of mine had a restaurant on South Street, and every time we needed something, we just go to the store and get it. Well, what about the cost of you leaving the place?
The gas.
What about the gas? Your time. Remember, your time is money. Whether you own the place or not, your time is always money. So we have to keep everything that we do in perspective of how much does this cost, how much does that cost? If you think about it, it's all said and done, your food and labor cost to produce something is almost 40-some%
Of the selling price.
of the selling price. You know, then you have overhead cost. What did it cost you to come into your place, turn the lights on, turn the gas on? Was it worth me roasting that one top round for a small party, or should I buy the beef already cooked? So all I got to do is slice it, put it in the gravy, and send it out. As much as we love to cook everything from scratch, it still costs money. You know, like I said, you're going to turn the gas on for one top round, you have a party of 20 people, and you need hot roast beef sandwiches, maybe a funeral luncheon. Well, you're not getting much for a funeral luncheon, maybe 10, 11 bucks. So you buy there are fabulous products out there now that are already cooked and ready to go. Is that what I do? Or do I go in, roast it? Do I have other things to do? If I'm roasting that beef, am I preparing other items so I'm utilizing my time? You know, we first started the catering business, it was a little tough because they wanted me to come in, but we weren't doing much business, so I was working like whenever. Well, that's not how I was trained to work. You know, I go in, this is what I need to do. Oh, well, I need you for 2 days this week. Parents or no parents, I was like, well, what do you want me to do? Then they wanted to call me the day before, my day off. Oh, we have a funeral lunch, you got to come in. You know, was it worth us getting the chickens already stuffed, or do we stuff them ourselves? And of course, we stuffed them ourselves because it was nothing to make stuffing. You know, we already had celery and onions on the premise, so we would cut it all up, make our own stuffing. I would buy the size 6-ounce chicken breast, skin on. So again, you have to know how to buy the product you're using. You know, I would buy skin on chicken breast, 6 ounce. I want them to the size that I need. You know, if it's for dinner and I'm getting 20, 25 bucks, I'd buy an 8 ounce. If you wanted a double lobe, that means double breast to make it look like it's bigger. So they would give you, you know, an 8 ounce chicken breast. If I wanted to use it for lunch, I could split them and have a 4 ounce and pound it out a little more and be able to wrap it around a stuffing for, you know, and now I knew my cost was in half. So again, we have to think of all these things to come up with a food cost of what do I need to sell my product. And again, even in the supermarket business and retail, we have lost leaders. Like I said about the lobster, you have to decide how many items on your menu you want to sell. What do you want to put on there? If you have too much of everything, what's my inventory? Everything you have, you got to buy it, right? We got to keep it somewhere. And they always used to say money on the shelf. There's no money nowhere because it's not selling, it's not moving, it's just trapped. You know, you want to move your inventory. You don't want to, you know, some places don't even have freezers because they want to buy every couple of days if you're buying that much. You know, do I buy? I know Lady Astor makes an unbelievable stuffed chicken breast. Already ready to go. And trust me, it is a stuffed chicken breast. It's like a 3 ounce chicken breast over all the stuffing. You know, it's just like the pot pies when you buy them frozen. And I talked to the students about it. You get about an ounce of meat and the rest is some vegetables and it's all dough. You know, a true pot pie doesn't have dough in the bottom of them. It's supposed to be covered. That's a true pot pie. You know, sometimes you put biscuits, but never on the bottom. But Swanson says, I'm going to get you good. I'm going to sell you the top, the bottom, and I'm going to have 3 ounces. And you say, oh, it's only $1. Yeah, but just like the dollar store. The dollar store is the biggest perception in the world, biggest money makers we could possibly imagine. Because all that stuff is like a quarter, 30 cents. Their profit margin's like 60% profit. You know, on everything they make, even with the food. Some people shop for a living at the dollar store, thinking it's going to be great. I remember being there, and I saw these little steaks. And I see the guy buy like 4 of them. And I said, you know, something's wrong. Let me go back and just check this out. So I go back and look at the steak. They're 1 ounce. They slice them on a slicer frozen. So he paid $1. That means there's 16 ounces in a pound. He paid $16 a pound for that steak. But you don't know that when you're going to the store and buying it because it's perception. You just, oh, give me 5 of them. Well, 5 ounces of beef for $5? Wow. What do you, and you know, it's not that good of meat anyway. But if they have a block of meat and they can use the bandsaw to slice them, they can slice as thin as you want them or as thick as you want them. It looks big and we're buying and say, wow, this was great for $1. But the person selling it to you is smiling because it's only cost them 50 cents. So they make 50 cents. And sometimes you don't want to outcost yourself, so you want to work on volume. You know, if I can only make a quarter on something, but I'm going to sell 2,000 of them, it's not too bad. If I'm going to try to make $1 and only sell 500 of them, well, now I got to push to make sure that I sell them or I'm going to get stuck with them. You know, that's why sometimes you see products on sale at the supermarket because they bought them, they tried to sell them, and you know what? They're going to lower it to a price where they're going to get their money back. Believe you me when I tell you, they're not going to lose money, but they're going to just get their money back, which they're okay with. Because believe it or not, supermarkets may be working on a 0.5% to 1% profit because they have so much product and so much waste. You know, I was always amazed of what do they do with all the produce that sits there and it doesn't sell. You know, they're constantly filling the stocks, a lot of them with produce, and we know that as food people that we can't really donate any of the cooked foods to any of the homeless because if somebody gets sick, we're in trouble. You know, you have a catering job and you say you got to pay for 50 people and only 25 show up. It is your right not to give that food, and you should not give that food to these people. You tell them, I'm sorry, you know, if you would have called me 3 days before, I might have been able to cut it back. But if they, suppose they take, you pack it up for them real nice, they put it in their car, they come back in, they're partying, then they get in their car, they go to another place, and then 8 hours later, they're finally going home, they say, let me put it in the refrigerator. And then they consume it, and your name's on that package, and they get sick. You know what? I'm calling these people up because they got me sick. No, they didn't. You got yourself sick. You should have refrigerated or not taken it home. So we all have to be careful of that too, because again, that's something we have to keep an eye on as independent owners, that we have to watch that somebody's always out to get you. You know, because you're successful and everybody's mad, but that's just it. You know, that's part of being the target. Again, we're in business to make money. And no matter what you do, again, sometimes prepackaged items. Like I'm doing an event in Roxborough for the Chefs Association. They're going to do a Rocktoberfest. Finally, after a year, they're listening to me tell them to do a festival on the street, you know, for the community. Because in every community, I'm sure you all go through this. If you have a building that's in an operation, like we're run by the RDC, the Roxborough Development Corporation, and they take a tax. I tell them it's shakedown money. For what? And one guy says, well, you know, we put a new pavement down. I said, but you're not bringing people to the area. My business is sitting here looking for customers, and I'm paying you to bring business here. You're not bringing anybody. You know, a new pavement doesn't bring people into my advertisement, marketing, and branding of this neighborhood does, and all the neighborhoods have them. It just gets me that you have to pay that kind of money to them, and they're supposed to help build you. You know, Manny Young's not too bad because they do have festivals that bring business. But some of the other ones just don't do it. And finally, they're going to do one. And I said, you know what? For safety reasons and for cost factor, let's just get a prepackaged brownie that's already packaged. Because when you go to festivals, people aren't really concerned about how great the product is. They just want something to eat right then and there. And you have to keep that in mind, too. You know, being a chef for so many years, I don't have a problem with sometimes buying pre-products, you know, and jazzing them up or just selling them the way it is. And sometimes you just say, listen, you know, this is what we do. You put your own label on it. The consumer really doesn't know. They don't really get into that. Okay, first PowerPoint one is controlling revenue. If you see that one, it says maximizing profits, maximizing profits. It should be, I don't know, there's so many handouts.
I don't have that. I have controlling food sales. Oh, okay.
When we're controlling revenue, we achieve effective control over revenue. Management, establishment, standard procedures intended to ensure that food sales are documented, priced correctly. When you have a business, a freestanding business, You have to understand that in order to control the food that's coming in, you need to know what? You have guest checks, to control the cost. Because sometimes people say, oh yeah, make me a burger real fast. I need it for table 35. Well, who's controlling that cost? Especially you have some servers, you got to keep an eye on that. They have dupe system and a POS. POS means point of sale. That's those machines, you push the numbers, they cost a lot of money. Back in the day, we never really had them. We had guest checks. But again, you open up the door for whoever's working for you to sometimes steal from you. And that's part of food cost is your chef taking, you wonder why your food cost is going up, but your sales is still the same. Why is that? Somebody's stealing something from you. The only time the food cost goes up is if it's wasted or you're throwing it away or you're not getting the right price for it. But if your sales is coming in and your food cost is going up, there's got to be a reason for that. So you got to keep an eye on where the food going. These three systems usually do that. Number of checks will tell you, how many sales. The POS are great because that'll keep track of everything. And then that'll make your decision on, did this chicken sandwich sell or did another sandwich sell? I threw this pulled pork on, but it's really not selling because it's not the type of restaurant, but you want to put it on anyway. But again, when I said to you, you can't be all things to all people. Especially if you're a themed restaurant, you don't want to try to offbeat the theme of what you're trying to sell. If I'm a Hawaiian themed restaurant, I want to sell things from Hawaii. I don't want to sell cheesesteak because it's not the type of restaurant. If I had chicken on kebabs with pineapple, that's going to sell. But the POS machine keeps track of all that. They'll tell you what time you served it, who you served it to, what table bought it, and gives you all the rundown of everything. Yes? It's a duplication where you have double check. Sometimes with a check system, when you ring it in, it has a duplication on the back, so one check will go to one, the other one you keep an eye on. So that's the dupe system, so you have two of something. Years ago, and I say that because I'm an older guy, they used carbon copies of the checks, so when you wrote a check out, you had a second copy of them. So now with these POS, majority of the people, now you got to make sure, that's a good thing to let Uncle Sam know, but a lot of times with the guest checks, you write some in, you write some out. I know what it's like to be, independently owned, and sometimes some things come in and don't go out. You also got to keep that in mind. Just because you're getting cash don't mean you put it in your pocket. Somebody has to justify whether you're making money or not. Even you being the owner still. You don't just go to the drawer and say, I think I need $100. I got to go around the corner, take 100 out. If you put a number in, where'd it go? I don't know. I had to use it for something. Everything's a cost. Everything needs to be justified. Because if you don't do it, your employees see it, they just figure, well, if they're going in there, I can too. So again, that's another part of costing. Maximizing profit. Extended menus require more kitchen and more equipment, more storage. As I said to you before, you don't want to have an extensive, Fridays has a menu like going with the Win Part 5 book. First of all, it takes the customer too long to order. Second of all, you confuse the customer. Do I want that? This looks good. That looks good. Are you ready to order? Well, I'm going to be here. The longer they sit at that table, it costs you money because you want to turn the tables over to turn a profit. So you have to keep that in mind that you don't want a too extensive of a menu, but you also don't want to minimize menu where you're only going to have a certain amount of people and that's it. They ask me at school sometimes, you don't have a vegetarian item on the menu. Well, no, because I'm not really a vegetarian restaurant. I will accommodate them if I can, and this is, I'll take a vegetable from this dish, maybe rice from that dish, but it all depends who's vegetarian and what level they're at. A lot of times it's the level I don't eat meat, but I eat eggs and cheese. Well, that's not really a true vegetarian, so where do I go with that? If I put on the menu, I might not sell any. So now I'm preparing this product, at school it's different, I'm not paying them, but if you're paying somebody to work that station, and then they're there like this, okay, so far you haven't gotten any orders in. Day 2, so far we didn't sell any. Well, does that mean we don't sell them? Well, it's not selling. Now, if I was a vegetarian restaurant, you'd sell it right at the door because the customer understands where they're coming from. So these are some of the things you got to keep in mind. Studies have shown that 20 to 24 menu items is a number that can provide variety and be easily managed. 60 to 75% of items sold will be concentrated among the same 8 to 12 menu items. So, if we have a chicken breast, we might want to sell 4 or 5 different chicken dishes, but we're using the same chicken breast. The only thing that's going to change is maybe the topping. Maybe I have a roasted pepper with provolone, but I'm also using provolone on something else. So when you're buying the provolone, you can maximize your profits by using that for other items. But you don't want to get too crazy. I remember looking at a Fridays menu a while back. I haven't been in one in a while, and I saw Tillamook cheese on like everything. Anybody ever hear of Tillamook cheddar cheese? It's a cheese that comes from the Pacific Northwest. Very popular in the Tillamook area of Oregon. And it was just that they oversaturated the name of it. Everything was Tillamook, Tillamook, Tillamook. Well, am I selling Tillamook cheese or am I selling the product that the cheese is going on? And that was my question to myself. Because a lot of times it's hard for me if I go out with anybody to eat. They always want to know, what do you think? And I always say it's fabulous, great. You know why? Because it causes too many conversations. And I don't want to hurt nobody's feeling, but if it's that bad, I will hurt somebody's feelings. Because if you're in business, you might as well make it the best you can instead of trying to, I call shoemaker the item. You know, just kind of get it out. Doesn't matter. You can even taste it. You know how many times I have a student to bring me a dish and they say, well, chef, I said, well, did you taste it? Oh, no, I didn't taste it. Well, how the hell can you cook it if you didn't taste it? You know, you have to build on flavors and you got to be able to taste the product. If you like it, it'll sell. If you don't like it, it's not going to sell. Differentiate are sufficiently different from others in their class that consumers develop preferences for them. Customers will travel great distances and pay higher menu price to get what they want. There is a place called 7 Stars out in Coatesville. Anybody ever hear of it? You have, right? They don't put any advertisement. They've been around for 25, 30 years. When you ask for a side of broccoli, it really is a head of broccoli. When you got a lobster tail, it was 2.5 pounds. Everything was big. But they were successful because they sold what they sold was good. It was big. They didn't have to market. They don't have to advertise. But they've been around. And one out of about 40 of us, 2 of us, that have been there before, but nobody knows anything about it. People will travel to go up there because of the big portions and everything they give them. So again, they're hidden gems. It's not necessarily whether you're advertising, but if you cook good food, people will come no matter what. And people will pay too. You know, per se, one of the most fine dining restaurants in the country in New York costs $300 to go to dinner. Now, of course, with little tastings, you might be hungry after you get out of there, but it's a fabulous dinner. But how many chances are we all going to get to go up there? Maybe once a year, maybe once in a lifetime. When there are people out there, you know, going once a week. So people will come, serve good food, and they'll come. So it doesn't matter. Sometimes price isn't really a factor. You just have to make sure when you price something out that you price it to your availability. We got to get moving because I think I talked too much. What to sell for you is a display, opposed to having a menu item. Because we're talking about mostly savory items here, but when it comes to a bakery, what is really going to sell first is what does it look like. You know, we talk about that when we go into diners. What's the first thing when you walk into most diners? What do you see? A pastry display. And you know, you go to Cheesecake Factory. What do you see? Those high-end cheesecake. You're buying it before you even get into the building. I think I'm coming back. I want to buy one slice of this and one slice of that. Nobody, you didn't care what the price was. If it was $10 a slice, you're still buying 2. Why? It looked good, the atmosphere is good, and because it looked so good, you're buying it no matter what the cost was. So if the display case is your marketing item, that's what you got to make sure looks good. If they look nice and high, you know, what's another layer of a cake cost you? Practically nothing. You know, so now you have a 3-layer carrot cake that it's going to cost you maybe 25 cents more to get an extra $2 for the item. So when it comes to pastry items or display items, the display case is going to be your selling point. You know, even if you had a display case with sandwiches in them, the better the sandwich looks, just make sure that sandwich coming out of the kitchen is going to look like that sandwich you're showing. Because sometimes it doesn't. Then the customer says, by the way, I bought this pastrami and there's 2 slices on there. And what are you going to say? Well, I know pastrami's expensive. Well, charge them for it. Anybody ever been to a real Jewish deli? You see what they give you like this. You can make 2 or 3 sandwiches out of them. People don't mind paying $10, $11 for that sandwich, do they? No, because they're getting the value. And they're getting the cost, you're getting the value. The customer doesn't mind paying for something that looks good and something that is going to sell. It tastes good, it looks good, I don't mind paying. You know, those pierogies we talked about, I don't care how good they were tasted, I still ain't paying $10 for a dozen of pierogies. That's like 70 cents a piece for a piece of dough that's got potatoes filled inside of it. You know, being a chef on my end, I just have a hard time doing it. I could buy some fresh ones that I've seen for $5.99 a dozen, which are just as good. You know, okay, these are homemade and whatnot, but it's still not cutting the mustard for me. So I'd be a hard sell as a consumer to pay that kind of money, but yet the place has been in business for almost 10 years now. But again, that's the product you have. If you can market it and sell it, it doesn't matter the price. Any questions? Okay. Variety, item arranged and location, descriptive language. We talked about that, right? And this is for menu. This is, you know, part of costing the item out. We haven't really got even into the costing part of it yet, but just to be able to sell the product at the price you want to get, you want to make sure the descriptive language is there and also the kitchen personnel and equipment to make it. You know, we never want to sell something or too much of something. You want to design your menu, you got to make sure you know what your cooking equipment's going to be. You know, if you're selling fried foods, you can't sell 6 or 7 varieties of fried items with one fryer, because then you're going to be in the weeds. You're going to be saying, well, I need 5 of these, 4 of them. Well, we only have 2 baskets. So what does that tell you? Take out a stove or something and put in 4 more fryers. Or change your menu and don't fry so many foods. So that's also going to dictate to you, you know, what size, for instance, with the bakery. What size is at my bakery? Can I make all the stuff that I want to sell? Or do I got to sub out? Can I buy the cakes already? In today's market, you can buy yellow cakes frozen, ready to go. I know when I used to work at the bake shop at the Adams Mark, we used to use a Kiesfasser, which is a cherry brandy, or a simple syrup if you don't want to use alcohol, in between the cakes to moisten them back up again, because you can't keep up with the volume. You got to make them and freeze them. So no matter what you say, it's still a frozen product. So if you can get something that you can that's manufactured, tastes close to you, all you have to do, jazz it up a little bit, then you can maximize your profits, because you don't. What's cheaper, buying it already made or buying another oven? Then if you buy another oven, you got to buy more, make sure it fits under the exhaust system. So now we've got 2 dilemmas. I need another oven, or do I buy them already made? And there's many products out there that you can look for, major manufacturing bakeries, like the bakeries as big as this whole building. And they have 7 or 8 different, they have a rotating oven, they have deck ovens, so you can maximize your profit by being able to put more variety in. Maximizing profits, menu continue. Restaurants with extensive menu appeal to the first-time customers more than limited menus. First time you go in, you see a big menu, you get excited, but if you go back a lot of times, menu's too big. Wait staff sales techniques, verbal sell-up, reinforce the printed menu for greater emphasis. Managers and chefs should hold daily meetings. Again, communication is the secret to success. If you have people that are selling the front of the house for you, even if you're a food vendor in a truck, somebody's the vocal point, you're back there cooking, you need somebody to start to sell that product. Hey, listen, we got these hoagies, unbelievable. You know, tell your servers, make one for them. You know, I say fine, in the medium to fine dining, we always used to, when we ever do a menu, we always make the menu items for the servers. Why is that?
If they can taste it, they will sell it.
Right, why? Because there are salespeople. As much as there's always a glitch between the front of the house and the back of the house. I don't know if any of you people get into that, but there's always that issue. We need to make sure they're comfortable with selling your product, because guess what? They always throw the chefs under the bus. By the way, the chef's having a bad day. I think you should order this. Well, you don't have a bad day. You just are pointing them to something you don't want them to sell. You see what I'm saying? So right away, they're blaming the kitchen. If I run out of something, you know, I blame the purveyor. I don't blame myself. I say, listen, the product wasn't up to what we think we should sell, so we had to send it back. Let the customer know that you care. Because what's going to happen? You'll increase sales, because they say, you know what, this individual really cares about the business they're selling. They didn't just say, oh, 86 it, we're out of it. No, give a little explanation. Give a little language behind why you don't have that product. Not because you forgot to order it, or you didn't want to order it, or you're not really selling it. I mean, I really can't stand sometimes you go somewhere and they say, well, we don't really have that item. Then why is it on the menu? Why you show me something? You know, I used to go to food shows, and I would look at a product and say, this is great, I want to get it for my place. And I'm sure you've all been to some shows. What do they tell you? Oh, it's not out in the market yet. Well, why are you showing it to me if I can't order it? You know, it's such a great product. I want it, but you ain't giving it to me, so what am I supposed to do? So we have to understand it. You know, what can we buy it already made, or do we make our own? Like when I helped open up a restaurant, we did crab mac and cheese, crab lollipops. Something of that nature we got to make ourselves, but it's cheap because it's macaroni and cheese. We used to fold some crab and then cool it, roll them into balls, bread them, and deep fry them. Stick a lollipop in them. I get $1 a piece. How do I know what my cost was? Well, I costed out the crab, macaroni, and the cheese sauce. Did I make my own cheese sauce, or did I buy it out of a can? That's the question you got to ask yourself. We're going to go through that. Just real fast, I'm going to go through this. We have controlling food sales. There are 3, that's page number 1. You all should have got that first one. When we're looking at an item, you have to weigh all your recipes out. You know, we were talking earlier to an individual that, you know, what is it, the item cost? Well, I'm not too sure. What does, how much is it going to cost me? Well, if you know it costs you $5 for a pound of flour, and it costs you $2 for a dozen eggs, you have to incorporate that. Now you have to weigh everything out for your recipe. Oh, what's a couple tablespoons of vanilla? Well, we're going to talk about that because if you look at the chart, you know, a teaspoon's equivalent to 1/16 of an ounce, or also equivalent to 1/3 of a tablespoon. I gave her a whole stack of what I had. See if they're there. I don't know. So we have to also, you know, when we talk about proteins also, and here, this handout has all different conversions for you to use. I just made some informative information to take with you, so you can practice these recipe costs. You'll see there's one that's liquid or volume measurement, because liquid and volume is different than the dry weight. You know, we also have to realize that when we're weighing things out. You know, if I need a pound of liquid, we know it weighs differently than a pound of flour. There's also one that says dry measurement. So again, it goes relative. Some of them will be the same. Some of them will tell you ounces and pounds. Next one's a cooking measurement equivalents. Then we have some U.S. metric, because some people have recipes that are metric formulated, especially in baking and pastry. They love to use the metric system. You know, even back in the 80s, I was always told we were going to the metric system, like tomorrow. You know, I'm still waiting for it, and that's 30 years later. They probably won't do it in the U.S., but if you buy a baking book that has recipes, a lot of them have metrics. So you need to get an idea, you know, that a milliliter capacity or 1/5 of a teaspoon is equal to 1 gram of weight. So you also have to figure that out with the extension. Then the next one's conversions for ingredients frequently used in baking. A cup of flour is equal to 5 ounces, which is equal to 142 grams. So when you're doing the extension of costing, you need to know all that. And then the next one is just another, it's got some safe meat temperatures, measurement conversions, oven temp. Remember, the time of cooking is going to be different when you use a convection oven opposed to a standard oven. Everybody knows what a convection oven is, right? Convection oven is run by a fan, so it always cooks 50 degrees hotter. So you have to adjust that so you don't burn your product. Remember, once you burn something, what happens? Somebody got to pay for it. So we talk about ounces and pounds. We talk about 16 ounces equal 1 pound. So if we're going to do a 4-ounce chicken breast, right? 4 into 16 is what? 4. So that means this is going to, let's just use a number of $2. So chicken breast costs us $2 a pound. We would wish. And 16 ounces is equal to 1 pound. If I want a 4-ounce chicken breast, what is that going to take us to? Exactly. 50 cents each. I say each, why? Because we talked about waste, right? If I'm buying my chicken breast already ready to go, I already know my bottom line price right now is 50 cents a chicken breast. So if we're doing a chicken sandwich, right, and we have the roll, equals 25 cents. We're going to put mayonnaise on it. Mayo equals, say, 15 cents. Both sides of the roll. A slice of cheese equals 30 cents. Okay? Then we have the chicken. Equals 50 cents. Right? That's pretty much our food cost. Anytime you're going to put something on there, you got to add it to it. We're going to put a slice of tomato. First of all, how much does tomato cost you each? How many slices are you going to decide to get out of it? Is it too thick? I like what I used to tell the workers, thin to win. Do a prime rib carve, thin to win's always better. Let them come back for more instead of them wasting it. So rather than get 3 slices of tomatoes, I might take a whole tomato, cost me a quarter, and then I'm going to get 10 slices out of it. What's it going to cost me? About 3 cents for a slice of tomato. So we got the roll, mayonnaise, cheese, chicken. Add it all up. 2, 3, 4, 7. $1.20 for the chicken sandwich. So that's pretty much the basis of how we're going to figure out food cost items. What they call extension, try to figure out all the way to the top. If it costs us, 1 pound costs us $2, if we're going to use an 8-ounce breast, that means each chicken breast is going to cost us $1. And it does take time, but if you have to put some kind of time into food costs in order to find out whether you're winning or losing. You know, we really want to win the game, but if the expenses are too expensive, how do we justify what we charge? Same thing, for instance, with your sticky buns. You know, Sadie was telling me, oh, I got pecans, walnuts, raisins, whole butter, the dough. I said, what's it cost? She sells it for $2.50 a piece. What is your cost of the item? Do you know? Exactly. Is she winning or losing on that product? Who knows? She might be breaking even because the 2 nuts and the raisins are a big expense. You know, what's a pound of walnuts cost? $10 a pound. Are you using a whole pound for a dozen? Using a half a pound for a dozen. So you have to, these are all the factors that have to come into play to figure out what is that one sticky bun going to cost me. For the majority, you have to know the quantity. You know, if you're making a dozen at a time in the bakery, you know, a hotel pan fits 12 by 12, say, pan. Okay, all my ingredients divided by 12 comes up with my factor of food cost. Now, how long did it take us to make this chicken breast? Probably, let's say 30 minutes, tops. If I'm paying somebody $8 an hour, right? And I got to divide that in half because it took them a half hour to make it, cost me $4 to make it. Now my sandwich is $5.20. First of all, if it takes that long, I'm going to fire the person. But we're using this for general numbers. So now my food cost and my labor cost is $5.20. If we 3 times that cost, it's costing us way too much. That means something's wrong. Either my labor's too high, my ingredients are too high, or maybe I shouldn't sell the chicken breast. And right now we see the labor cost, you know, it should take you 5 minutes or 10 minutes between grilling it and putting it together. So in all reality, it should only cost us maybe $1 in labor cost. And $1.20 in food cost, it's $2.20 times 3, $7. That's an average cost for a chicken breast or a Kaiser roll. Maybe a little less. Maybe you're not sure. Like Delilah talked about volume. You know, some of you might be going into big accounts. What does that tell us? You know, retail's different than wholesale. Wholesale's there for a reason. You know, we don't go to the Restaurant Depot because it's going to cost us more money than it would be at BJ's or the supermarket. We go why? Because of the price, volume. I'm buying 40 pounds of chicken. So 40-pound chicken breast now costs me $1.50. If I go to the supermarket or BJ, it's going to cost me $3 a pound. So you have to incorporate that in your cost. You're looking at volume when you're going for a major player. You know, if you get a school account, now they guarantee you once a week you're going to buy 300 sticky buns. So hopefully you can keep up with the volume, because once you say, wow, good thing I got this, you know, but now all of a sudden, where am I going to make it all? You know, you got to make sure you're set up for the volume that you want to sell. If you're selling out of your home, by rights, the Board of Health probably wants to know what your kitchen looks like once you get into a major player like that. Because as we all know, a lot of them won't let you use your house as your commissary. That's why we have these kitchens here that we use, or you buy or look into renting a room or that has a place that you can rent to go do your work. Some places have commissaries because all they have is a small little venue to make their, you got to make your soups to point A and bring them to point B and sell them. The Board of Health is a little more stricter now than it used to be many years ago. So we all have to keep that in mind when you're looking into, well, if I can get a big account, it's guaranteed money. So I can charge less. How much, if I want to get $2 or maybe $1.75 for the sticky bun, but retail going to cost $2.50. Because you might sell 7 that day at $2.50, but I got 200 sold automatically at $1.75. So you see the cost is I guarantee that money. So when we do extensions of food cost, we want to be able to know product A to product B, everything that you incorporate in that cost. Now, I don't usually incorporate salt and pepper into the item because you buy it in bulk, it's pretty reasonable. What's a pinch going to cost you? Some recipes, they have it there. We're going to do a recipe cost out. Let's see, what time is it? 2 o'clock? Or our next little break, I'll make sure we hand out, we'll do the first one on pastry flour. We're going to make blueberry muffins.